So hi guys, and today we're going to be reviewing basically my Black Apple MPM Ironhide. Now, you might be wondering, looking at the title and just thinking, is this clickbait? And the answer is yes and no. Yes, this is obviously nobody has really gotten to play with Black Apple's last project, the MPM Ironhide, that never got released before the raid that pretty much closed it, and pretty much the prototype was most likely lost in the raid. And even though there have actually been claims that Weijiang before that raid had given their plans, some of their prototypes and plans for future products to actually other third-party companies who are planning to reproduce them, there has currently very little evidence, and 2 years had passed after a raid, and virtually the companies, I think it was Fire Scorpion or Dream Factory, or I guess I heard it was the same thing, but anyways, the point is, we still haven't given us anything yet. In fact, Dream Factory, I heard, is actually been very inactive from what I've seen. Plus, after the thread for the Black Apple Ironhide on TFW 2005 pretty much closed up, it looks like all hope is currently lost for this figure currently being released. So, just saying, the reason why it was pretty easy for me to make Black Apple Optimus, well, turn my MPM Optimus Prime into Black Apple Optimus Prime inspired custom was because of the fact that since the Black Apple Optimus Prime had been released, I didn't really need to just look at the pictures of prototypes. I could see what was inside and how the toy functioned, so I could just tell which parts were used for which. Well, meanwhile, for Black Apple Ironhide, apparently nobody even got to see a video of it. Basically, just being played with or transformed. So as a result, since I didn't have any sources about what the figure looked like while transforming, I basically just had to look at the views from the outside. Many various attempts, I tried to do it, and apparently you see here, these doors basically were kind of folded up in basically a picture I'm gonna show you soon. Apparently I made these Google Drive images with basically images of the Black Apple Ironhide prototypes that I studied just for this. And you see here, the doors here basically become like the panels on his backpack. But however, I tried various times with why there are basically many various cuts on this, even though eventually the cuts became useless. But I tried countless times to try and make this fold in, but I was always unsuccessful, and soon I was just forced to turn this into a even bigger parts former than I originally intended. My original intent was basically for only the tires here to parts form and the bumper as well, but so when I would make this whole shell come off, like these two doors virtually can now come off. And though I've actually seen in close-up of the prototype that basically, well, his smokestacks hide under his feet. I did attempt this, but while you probably see me transforming, will probably see that there have been many various cuts on this that eventually became useless. It's because I was actually trying to make it like this, but unfortunately I did not have the prototype for number one, the physical prototype, number two, a video of someone playing around with the figure. So unlike Black Optimus Prime, obviously I don't have any of Weijiang's products. The fact that Black Apple was actually one of my biggest influences in toy customization, but apparently I never got to. have a chance to buy one, even though I kind of did want that hound figure, but yeah, it's just sad. Anyways, back to this. This figure is one of the longest figures I've ever had to customize. Like, it took literally 6 months, and I kind of cut myself various times. Like, basically right here, my middle finger is actually actually got like a slit here that basically was not very comfortable to look at. It like healed like months before I even finished the project, but through these months but anyways, it was actually just painful, and eventually I had to wear a bandage for like almost a month. This recently happened like during the end of March and the beginning of April. I was working on a new custom that apparently didn't go well, but I'm still working on it. But that will be for a different video. And now let's just get into Ironhide. So apparently here's Ironhide. As you probably see, he doesn't have his toes hanging out anymore, and that piece that went onto his hip, basically, after looking at some CGI images, I finally decided that it was not accurate. And when I looked at Black Apple's Ironhide toy, there doesn't even seem to be that piece there, so I just chopped it off. And now basically on the outside he looks much cleaner. Basically his legs have literally faced little to no modifications. And you see why there's string in this, and this piece of tape hanging on there. I'm just saying, this basically, consider the fact that I do not have all the right tools, not to mention the prototype, to do this project. I was just forced to do parts forming for some of them, and apparently I decided to cheat a little and just, attach some tape or strings to the pieces that were supposed to be parts formed, so basically they would not be able to technically come off. That's pretty much cheating to avoid parts forming, but there was not much I could do if I wanted to make it more accurate. Plus, if you look here, you'll probably see that there's wood instead of black plastic. Just saying, his original frame would not let me put these ball joints, these Lego ball joints in that connect to his arms. So apparently I had to tear apart the whole frame and build a new one. It was very hard getting Ironhide's head to still move afterwards, but it was pretty much worth it in the end. Anyways, and as you probably see here, he's pretty much doesn't look like he's tapped together well. I've heard various, obviously this is not exactly a good figure. This is one of my even though this custom took a long time, I pretty much didn't really take a lot of time when it came to the tabbing in. For the Black Apple Optimus Prime, you probably saw, it seemed to much fit in kind of perfectly, well, near perfectly to be exact. It never actually got the potential to actually tab in correctly, while this thing didn't even come close to my Black Apple inspired Optimus Prime. But basically, after a ton of work and some small injuries, plus that big finger cut, I finally made this, recreated basically Black Apple's best unreleased figure. Basically, I've been getting a lot of comments replies from the comments that basically Weijiang is technically basically a forced party or knockoff company, which honestly, is correct in a way, but personally to me, I kind of find it kind of insulting to Black Apple, because even though technically these figures are like, well, rip-offs of the original figures, they technically have been modified to the point where literally we might even be able to pass off as their own figure. Like basically, when I saw the Black Apple Ironhide prototype and the Black Apple Optimus Prime pictures, they completely looked like extremely different figures, and it was not until I basically looked at the toy reviews for Black Apple Optimus Prime and reverse engineered my MPM Ironhide when I finally realized that they were basically just like heavily modified knockoffs. But yeah, but anyways, either way, I must say something. Black Apple will always be one of my biggest influences when it comes to toy customization. I'm sad that he's lost face on creating these beautiful projects, but of course, it's his choice, and we'll just have to live with it, I guess. But obviously, he's got all these prototypes, pictures here, which I apparently try to replicate. Apparently, other than the bad tabbing in, it looks pretty good from what I've seen. And I think there was an undercarriage view. Yeah, there's the undercarriage view, and obviously not a perfect representation, but it had to do. And you see the cannons actually, see here, basically this giant cannon stores inside between the roof. Apparently I was not very interested with that, so basically, to show you proof, there's virtually nothing there except the small flap that becomes this backpack. Also, that small flap, as you will eventually see, basically was like a take from basically Black Apple, the Black Apple Ironhide prototype that eventually never. They didn't get released. But anyways, however, I did actually have to, as you probably see later, the backpack is a little, well, is much smaller than the original version, which basically is due to just one fact. I tried to do it, and basically I even tried to make hinges for it to fold, but apparently the hinges didn't go well, and I really made too many layers for it to basically to make the arms fold in, and when I basically tried to decide to just not put the hinges on, it basically prevented the doors from actually fitting in like this properly, and it made it tap in even worse than it already does now. Thus I had to do it. Even though I'm not sure about this, but I might be able to stick this into here, but apparently I don't want to, and I never really had any interest in basically storing these weapons in, or these cannons, so I didn't. And apparently I've actually heard rumors that, or not really rumors, from the prototype images, some people have theories that basically his Dark of the Moon assault rifles, which were all called heavy iron rifles, basically restore inside the doors, or probably even become part of the doors. Obviously, I don't really know whether that's true or not, but because obviously nobody got to play with it. But to be honest, I'm just going to say one scene. I wasn't interested in that either, so sorry. Otherwise, everything seems to be the same. Obviously, I didn't really do a good. Obviously, if you looked at a previous video that basically had just basically a stop motion on my main channel, Kiratos 9x9 Productions, you'll probably see a video with this an unfinished Ironhide there. He's pretty much tapped in even worse, and has white residue all over his vehicle mode. Basically, that was because I was still in the middle of making this guy. As I told you, this pretty much took, I think, until Yeah, I don't remember, but I say it's around the middle of March when I finally finished this project. It wasn't really it was actually, although basically it was kind of a painful experience, the result was worse than the technically it. There were a few days where I could not stop staring at the vehicle mode, and then probably now we're going to try. And as you probably know, the windows basically were covered with so much residue that I couldn't get them off. As a result, I just painted over them with blue, like the windshield here. There's also a tiny magnet there, which apparently represents a dollar sign that's supposed to hold onto the backpack during transformation. But however, I painted over that too, so no one would basically see just a silver dollar sign sticking out on a windshield, which obviously would not really be something you would see every day on a pickup truck. And if you wonder how I really did most of the tasks, it's basically rare earth magnets. Also, before I get into transformation, I just point out the parts forming. Apparently, as you probably remember, I tried to make the doors into the flaps that hang on his shoulders, but eventually it didn't go well, so I just built these for him, and these and basically the doors come off and are not used in robot mode, while these replace them. And he's got these feet as well, that obviously were removed from there, using a pin removal tool that I did with which basically I obviously didn't have an automatic center punch, so I just used a hammer and a nail, which apparently, even though it wasn't that convenient compared with the automatic center punch, which I don't have, I did find actually something I eventually got used to, despite the fact that many times I did damage figures by like pushing on one side just so the pin could come out. But anyways, it was pretty much a sad story sometimes, but I always was able to find a way to repair it. Anyways, as you see here, the rifle is basically connected here, and we also we also connect to the backpack using magnets, and you'll eventually find out why after I transform this figure. And obviously there are all these parts here, and the weapons here. So basically now, it looks like I've been speaking a lot, so I guess we should just transform this figure now.
sweet harmony. Someday we'll all be free.
So apparently after some pretty and not so easy transformation, we've got my personal Black Apple Ironhide custom in his robot mode. As you probably saw, just saying, some of the prototype images had words written on them to describe the functions that were different from the original figure and made unique. One of them, I managed to translate them, but for rare in Chinese, but eventually those images I made while translating them, eventually I got lost on my computer, so I probably won't be able to show them right now. Well, in this video at least, but at least we've got the figure here. Obviously, he's got made deals that the original, that basically the Black Apple Ironhide seem to have had, which I'll probably show you in basically some like basically, if you see here, if you see here closely, the windshield there is in one big piece. So is this one, and of course the backpack scene. If you wonder what these nails are there for, basically they're here to secure on the heavy iron rifles. And of course his tires seem to be bent a different way. Same with what I did. And his shoulders are obviously articulated where the original one had floppy shoulders. These ones are just stiff in place because I use magnets to position them, and after what, as you saw, kind of a narrowly escaped parts forming basically happened just so I could get those. And why I would have pretty much enjoyed using these parts as its actual flaps, I wasn't able to successfully make them, so as a result I had to build them out of scratch. Well, basically these pieces just apparently just became parts formed. Like if you see here, there are like a lot of cuts and slices and super glue residue, all a result of basically a failed attempt to turn the doors into those flaps. And these nails there basically are used to secure the vehicle mode's hood, which is already not hanging there well. And of course, there's the bumper, which I heard was supposed to have stored inside his chest piece, like the original toy but in a different way. For the original toy, had a flap there that eventually became incorporated in these two parts. It was pretty hard managing to complete these into one, turn basically these three pieces into just two pieces. It was very hard. It meant of dangerous cutting, and honestly, if I could basically buy a second MPM Ironhide just for the transformation, I most likely would not have done that, because number one, basically the price, and number two, some of the parts basically I kind of salvaged them from broken toys in the past. That, especially those shoulders there. These arms come, I think, from the Dark of the Moon Megatron. I mean, Dark of the Moon Optimus Prime from the 2011 toy line. Though he is pretty cheap to get on eBay, or at least that was what I saw the last time. I wouldn't really recommend buying a toy just because you want to salvage the parts and leave the rest of it useless. Of course, you are free to do whatever you want, but I just wouldn't recommend that. And obviously, these tapes just another way of basically avoiding parts forming by cheating. And as you probably guessed, just saying, I've actually seen many of the images never really showed Ironhide was basically without his cannons. But I actually did see some evidence that the cannons do split. Like I remember seeing a picture of a released Black Apple Optimus Prime next to the prototype of Black Apple Ironhide, and basically Ironhide didn't have cannons at that time, even though I think they were forcefully removed by punching out pins, I think. But either way, there's not really any way to tell except asking Black Apple himself, which would obviously be hard because you have to hard locating him, of course, because he's not in China, and basically there's like 1 billion people there, and he virtually could be anywhere, of course. Apparently some of his arms are still a bit loose after the massive amount of modification, even though they still fit in there. Apparently these used to be the doors, used to be the roofs that eventually were snapped into place using these wires and made this. Apparently there are the rifles here. I'll probably show you an image with basically Ironhide with both the rifles and the cannons later, but normally I prefer not to let him hold both his cannons and his rifles at the same time, for it kind of adds too much weight on his arms. So basically here's basically one of the rifles just fitting loosely into Ironhide's hand. Basically, this is just some type of clay. It's not exactly clay, it's blue tack that I just managed to kind of make much looser, have a looser grip, and then basically fit into his hands like this, so he can basically grip them pretty well, much better than if there was no blue tack. If there's anything I really don't like about posable fingers on Masterpiece figures, is because the fact usually this makes holding accessories much harder. Apparently the Alien Attack Firage, which is like all fingers, which is basically an all fingers moving choice, and I chose that, and after that, as a result, I basically wasn't able to hold anything properly anymore. But Alien Attack Firage, that's obviously what was still good, even though of that. But yes, anyways, of course, just saying that even though articulated fingers might seem to actually be something that is very satisfying and actually interesting, there are obviously, like everything else, are disadvantages. Like basically holding accessories virtually becomes a pretty big problem when it comes to accessories that basically are not meant to grip well inside basically a hand like this. A hand like this, of course. Wonder why, but this time it looks like his left shoulder seems to be a little more floppy than it normally pretty much was. And also you might be, and if you really are wondering why I decided not to buy the DNA designs kit, it's just I basically didn't feel like it. I just felt like that basically, since most of the kit would have been used as anyways, because I didn't really want the short supports, and I already didn't want the other parts because I would be because in the end, after I made all of them, they probably would not fit in the figure anyways. or would just be completely useless add-ons to this. So as a result, I just built my own. Obviously, I said normally just buying a whole figure just for a few parts that eventually that you would use is usually something I try to avoid if possible. Of course, there are a few times where I eventually have to buy the full figure, but if there's an option, I normally avoid it. However, something I've actually having problems is that, as you see here, the rifles are meant to split here, which honestly does make it look cool in some stop motions if I ever use this guy in future stop motions. Because I actually am planning for basically a video called Meets the Heavy Iron. Basically, one scene I'm planning there is basically Ironhide just flips this over him and then rips these two connectors apart, which are held on by rare earth magnets. And if you wonder why those nails were added on his backpack in the first place, well, it was just to do this. Even though basically, I have to say, one thing I actually tried to do that eventually was unsuccessful was allow one of them to hang on his, allow them to how each one to hang on his back by its own, like, you know, like basically, I remember in the Dark of the Moon game, there are a few scenes where it was only like using one of the two rifles, and as a result, basically his other rifle was stuck on his back still, which obviously can't be done here. But now, moving on to basically the details of this figure that basically see here, basically you might see all these parts here that obviously this is a perfect representation, and just like my Black Ops Optimus Prime, it obviously wasn't perfect, and this was much hard to make near perfect because of the fact I only had the prototype images instead of the real ones. Though, I'm just saying that if I try to remember basically I try to get that Google Drive image document with the prototype images on the description down below, and or you could just search them up on the internet because there's actually a lot of them on there, which honestly is pretty much the place I got it from. But anyways, even though we might not really be getting a Black Apple Ironhide figure like ever, we just have to stay positive and just remember that we already have that basically we still have other choices. Like apparently Black Mamba made pretty much an almost unmodified oversized Ironhide, and we've obviously got the MPM still. There's the fact that MPM is still floppy and doesn't tab well, but of course if you want to, you might be able to, or of course, who knows, maybe I pretty much depend on the Optimus Prime's, on Dark of the Moon Optimus Prime's shoulders to make his shoulders, but maybe, who knows, maybe you could make an improved version of this, I don't know. But anyways, I guess that's it for now, so goodbye!